In 1871, Darwin published another book, The Descent of Man, in which he claimed that man evolved from some ape-like creatures. Darwin was unable to provide any evidence supporting his claims, but clearly fabricated some imaginary scenarios. Darwin also embraced an interesting thought. He asserted that some races were more evolved and therefore more advanced than others, whilst other races, on the other hand, he considered still to be at the same level as the apes. There was another important aspect to Darwin's theory. He erected his entire theory on the concept of struggle for survival. According to him, a fierce conflict, a bloody struggle pervaded the natural world. The strong always won against the weak and thus ensured development. Darwin asserted that a similar conflict also held true for human races. Even the subtitle in his book, The Origin of the Species by Way of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, explicitly reveals his racial views. According to Darwin, the favored race was the European white man. Asian or African races were, quite simply, failing in their struggle for survival. Darwin went one step further and even suggested that these races would finally be totally annihilated. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. At the same time, the anthropomorphous apes will no doubt be exterminated. As this statement explicitly reveals, Darwin was an out-and-out racist, believing in the superiority of the white man. He believed the white man would, in time, first enslave and then eradicate the so-called inferior races. Indeed, Darwin's ideas found fertile ground. In his time, the white man was already in search of a theory to justify his crimes. From the 16th century on, Europeans started to colonize various parts of the world. The first colonizers were the Spanish under the guidance of Christopher Columbus. In a short while, the Spanish conquistadors invaded South America, enslaving the native peoples who inherently had been a peaceful race. The provinces of South America, which were rich in gold and silver, were plundered by these invaders. The native people who resisted were slaughtered. After the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and then the British took part in the competition for colonization. In the 19th century, Britain became the world's greatest colonial empire. From India to Latin America, the British Empire exploited the natural resources far and wide. White man was plundering the world for his own interests. Of course, these colonial powers did not want to be remembered throughout history as plunderers. So they have sought a means of justification for this exploitation. The justification was labeling the exploited people as primitive men, even possibly animal-like creatures. Such assertions were first put forward during the early period of colonization, the time when Christopher Columbus set sail for America. By claiming that the American native people were not real human beings, but a developed animal species, the Spanish colonizers sought to justify their enslavement. As it happened, this argument did not attract many advocates, since during that period, Europeans widely believed that humans were all created equal by God, and that all came from one common ancestor, the prophet Adam. However, things changed in the 19th century. As materialist doctrines flourished, people started to ignore the fact that human beings were created by God. This was also the birth of racism. The allegedly scientific basis of racism was Darwin's theory of evolution. Indian anthropologist Lalita Vidyarthi states, Darwin's theory of the survival of the fittest was warmly welcomed by the social scientists of the day, and they believed mankind had achieved various levels of evolution culminating in the white man's civilization. By the second half of the 19th century, racism was accepted as fact by the vast majority of Western scientists. With such racial views, Darwin provided solid support to the colonizing policies of the European powers. The imperialism of Victorian Britain chose Darwinian theory as its so-called scientific basis and justification.